I am here with, I believe the username on Substack is Socratic Psychiatrist, Dr. Martin Greenwald. Dr. Greenwald, how are you doing today?
I'm well, sir. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. You've written a number of articles which I think are well thought out and respectable, but also trying to maybe push back or be a voice of reason on things that I think have maybe weren't controversial in the past have become controversial. And my take, rather than to say like you write about the efficacy and usefulness and moral justification for our prison system, because I think there's been a big push to defund the police and abolish prison, and I'm probably more supportive of those things than the average person, but maybe I'm supportive of them in an interesting or creative way rather than just maybe honestly, there's some stupid ways that people
hmm
go about. Like, I don't believe that. I am not in favor of abolishing policing or hating on individual police officers. I think there's a lot of tragedies that happen. There are civilians who get shot in cases that are after the fact. We say, well, that wasn't justifiable, but also you've never been a police officer with a gun and been forced to go through like some pretty difficult situations. So to say that, oh, you would never make that human error, I think is uncharitable. And I think, if we want to have a functioning society, you got to have to respect the people who help keep things together, even if they're not perfect. So, we're kind of coming at this, I think, from a less polarized perspective than, kind of what you might get on the street of like, oh, we just got to lock everybody up and war on drugs and just go balls to the wall. And then on the other hand, like every cop is a pig and we all hate them. So we're more talking structurally. We're more talking about incentive structures. What is crime? Why does it happen? And how do we prevent it? How do we deter crime? And you're coming at this from a psychological perspective, in this question of recidivism. Like, what is the best way to take people? Well, even before we get to recidivism, it's prevention and deterrence. How do we prevent and deter crime from a psychological perspective? And then while they're in prison, what's the best way to give them the best opportunity for hopefully reintegrating into society afterwards? So kind of want to get your broad overview on those topics.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about all that. I should say, to be responsible as a caveat, so I'm a psychiatrist. Sometimes, some good, decent number of my patients have experience with the criminal justice system, but I just want to be clear for the conversation. I'm not a criminologist, nor a forensic psychiatrist. So I have experience with this, but a lot of this is uh, just my own thinking on these subjects, and observing the world. So uh, I'd say, from the psychological perspective, I think one of the most important things to keep in mind about crime in terms of prediction, recidivism, et cetera, is, as with most things in human behavior, past actions can often be predictive of future actions. And we should not fool ourselves about that. So by analogy, when we think about suicide, for example, probably the best predictor of someone attempting suicide in the future is whether they have already attempted suicide before. And then there's various other things, secondary and beyond that can predict. And I think similarly for violent behavior, I mean, I don't want to state as a fact that the best predictor of future violent behavior is past violent behavior, but it's basic things like that we need to keep in mind, and to keep in mind when we talk about the goals of prison, for example, in terms of reforming convicts to try to reshape them into productive citizens, or just keeping them isolated away from the rest of us just for our safety, or whatever else prisons are used for. Thinking intelligently and I think honestly about who is likely to continue to commit lots of crimes and who isn't. And I think it's pretty well known, correct me if I'm wrong, but that the huge majority of crimes are committed by a small number of pretty dedicated criminals. And then the other question is, well, how do you find those people before, if you can, before they start wreaking havoc? And or when you do find them, when they're wreaking havoc, how do you make sure they don't get back out again? For me, these are some of the important, questions that I want to ask. And, my thinking changes depending on whether I'm thinking about, talking about a particular person, right? Say like interviewing a particular person versus thinking about the system in general. But, I guess my piece that I wrote on prisons, I was thinking of it from the perspective of, the first priority is keeping innocent people safe. That's what I would say. The overriding priority is keeping innocent people safe, and dealing with convicts in a reasonably humane way is, sort of, I guess, a close second. You might say, but that's still very important to not be barbaric about those things. And so in the interest of not being too barbaric, I thought maybe we should bring back flogging as a slightly less barbaric approach to certain kinds of crime rather than prison, which is not a view I'm committed to, but I'm trying to think outside the box of how we can do this better. Sorry, so I don't want to ramble any further. Feel free to narrow me down.
No, I mean, I asked the broadest question. I've asked multiple broad questions at the same time, so I appreciate you trying to narrow the scope of this. And I think that's a good place to start, which is so flogging, I think, we're not committed to flogging, but it's a good way to say, hey, we're going to have an open-minded approach to this. We're coming at this question with new eyes. We're tabula rasa. We're not we're not just going to assume that the way that we've been doing things or the direction we've been heading is correct. It's time for some fresh thinking. And so I encourage that. And I think that's brave. And I think that it's also funny. I mean, it's good to see a blog post where it's like, bring back flogging. Okay. So this is funny. This is good. This is stimulating. And what I also like is that you are being sensitive to, on two fronts, there's an emotional, there's an empathetic duty that we have to, as much as possible, avoid putting people in cages, because that is not good. It's not good. The worst case, I would say, is solitary confinement, which I think maybe you can talk to me a little bit about, again, psychiatrist perspective. What does that do to a person? What are the lasting effects of that? And besides solitary confinement, you're being thrown in a cage with a bunch of other criminals who maybe you as a person, in this case, are not the nicest guy. Maybe you beat somebody up or you committed a murder, like you did something wrong. Okay, but putting you in a cage with a bunch of other people who are also not very nice, that is implicitly a punishment. And I want to point to something that unfortunately I see, and oftentimes it has to do with child abuse crimes. Like if you go to a story and there is a comment section, it will say, I hope you go to prison and you're sexually assaulted, or they'll say something much worse than that. And, people on the left for a while have been saying, how is this not cruel and unusual to have an implicit assumption that you have a high chance of being sexually assaulted in prison? Like, what kind of modern civilized group of people says that's acceptable, that's good, we want that to happen, we acknowledge that it's happening at maybe an unacceptable rate, and we tolerate it or we encourage it, we look the other way, or we're cheering it on? And so for me, I say I think that the word criminal justice is something I struggle with. I would prefer something like criminal management or civilian protection from criminals. Like I think that we have a duty to protect people from being victimized by crime. I think people have the right to live in safety and not fear that they're going to be burglarized or assaulted or anything like that. And so to what you're saying, in terms of predictive models, if somebody has committed a crime, they're much more likely than the baseline population to commit another crime in the future. And so, we have a duty to everyone to say, okay, there has to be some kind of separation here. You can't be in the same way that if a dog bites a person, we say, okay, well, you can't have your dog biting more people, so we're going to have to do something about this. Either you have to seclude your dog at a farm somewhere, or you got to put the dog down or something. In the case of human beings, I think we should expand our options in terms of how people can be separated from society and in what ways. And does that have to be within a literal prison? Or do we have opportunities, for example, with sexual abuse cases? When someone becomes a sex offender, they're part of a registry. They're not allowed to live within a certain distance from schools. And that's a system that we've set up, and I think it's actually a reasonable system. And I think in some cases we could expand on that system and go further and say that, if you have committed a crime, you are going to be, I mean, we technically all this information is public if you're good at, looking for it. But I think there should be databases, and there should be an ability to say, we're not just going to, when your prison sentence ends, you don't just get released into the wild to go wherever you want and do whatever you want. Because the unfortunate fact of the prison system is that there's a criminal radicalization that happens when you're thrown in. Maybe you committed a crime for whatever reason, a crime of passion, or a dispute with family or friends or something, and you weren't really involved with a criminal subculture. You were just someone who made a bad decision. But now you're in a prison, and you're spending maybe years of your life surrounded by people who are in a criminal subculture. And so you come out of it, maybe you weren't a gang member going in, but you come out of it, a gang member, and now that's amplifying and making the problem worse. So my priority is how do we, on the one hand, segregate people who are prone to criminality because of a demonstrated behavior, they've broken the law. How do we segregate those people from innocent, vulnerable populations, while at the same time not concentrating all the criminals together in a single small space so that they can amplify each other's criminality and form gangs and things like that? So that's my basic question. And I think that the idea of flogging, might not be my preferred solution, but at the very least, it's kind of pointing toward going in that direction of are there alternatives?
I think, So I think you're getting at a couple key things. So one is the importance of doing our best to distinguish. I'm just going to use the word antisocial. We can quibble about definitions, but for this conversation, I'm going to use antisocial to mean people who are basically characterologically not reformable, right? Many career criminals are would be diagnosed with what we would call antisocial personality disorder. So we want to distinguish the antisocial people, criminals, from all the other ones. The ones you were talking about, the people who actually did, they were either in the wrong place at the wrong time, or just it was a genuine lapse in judgment from a person who's otherwise not reasonably a threat most of the time. Or maybe a kid who gets caught young, or who gets picked up by the justice system young, before he's totally immersed in the culture beyond repair, if such a thing really happens, right? So trying to separate those two groups out as early as possible, right, and figure out who's who, because ideally I think we want to keep the people who are either early in their criminal career and it's a non-violent or not a scary criminal career. We want to keep them, if they're reformable, we want to keep them away from the career criminals. So it's not a training ground. And so the thought, we can forget, flogging sounds horrible. We can just abstract it from the particular and say, well, let's think about it. What kind of reinforcement would a young, impulsive guy who's maybe not thinking super long term, what would be good? And I think a swift, really painful negative punishment that is as close in time to the offense as possible is most effective. I mean, that's the way we punish children. You do it. You don't put them in timeout 2 hours after they do something bad. You take action. If you're going to discipline them, you have to do it immediately, or else they're just not going to understand. And not to sound too condescending to the criminal class, but yeah, they are not terribly forward-looking people. Whatever other virtues they may have. So I think to me, that's a very compelling idea, as opposed to drawing out the process, right? Because you said something like, for justice management, right? Or like a term that implies it's this ongoing thing, which, and now the devil's in the details. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what that brings to my mind is, we are drawing out a process that probably introduces more steps for things to go wrong, rather than just getting the whole thing over quickly. And seeing if it works. It also has the virtue, I think, of being reasonably empirically testable. Like these kinds of alternative systems, punishment systems can be empirically tested, I think, to compare. So anywho, so that's one question of how open are we to non-prison alternatives for criminals, but it needs to be something that's actually a punishment. Because I would add in here that the purely therapeutic approach, like the every prisoner, or no, it's not prisoner, sorry, every convict, every criminal needs therapy, and that's what's going to make them better. That's most people, I don't think, actually believe that. Maybe a few people do, and that's very naive, and that's just not. That's sort of a non-starter.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
I don't want to attack your entire field of study, but
please feel free. I do it every day. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Go for it.
But I mean, I think it's important that we have really smart people trying to understand human psychology. And I think at the very least, I will say this. Even if I believe that therapy in general doesn't work, and yeah, we can quibble about the details, but I'm just going to make that as a blatant statement. Like, it's not that psychology somehow is really successful with non-criminals, but then like when it comes to criminals, like it's uniquely a failure. It's that when people have mental disorders, mental illnesses, there's not, from my perspective, and feel free to contradict me, but we're remarkably, like the psychology field is remarkably less good at proving that, hey, we came up with this technique and this really helps people, versus like physical medicine, where it's like, okay, I have a stomach ulcer, I took some antibiotics and an acid blocker, and then the stomach ulcer goes away with a 90% rate. It's not perfect, it's not 100%, but it's 90%. Whereas it's like, is there any therapeutic technique or school, whether it's there's so many different schools, I wouldn't even know where to start, but this school, and there are some better than others. I think like cognitive behavior therapy or neurolinguistic programming. Like I don't think this is a hopeless endeavor. I think that we should try really hard to figure this out.
I can, I'll argue in favor of your position. And and I wouldn't speak for psychology. I mean, I speak for psychiatrists, so I wouldn't speak for psychologists as a technical field. I'll comment on human psychology all the time, but so yeah, let's take the case of a guy who is a otherwise decent guy, but he has an explosive anger problem, and like maybe every few months or like once or a couple times a year, something really triggers him, and he starts seeing red, and for like a minute or two, it's dangerous to be around him. Right. But it's not really reflective of who he is in his everyday behavior. Right. So this is a guy who would be liable to get himself in criminal trouble. And that's the kind of guy where a therapeutic intervention, I think, makes sense. Right. Because like he has a problem controlling his anger. Right. And like just a physical punishment from the state is not going to cure that issue. Right. And so, yeah, some really good therapy, and maybe, an SSRI, if he has like what we would now call intermittent explosive disorder or something like that, right? Like like pathological anger that explodes, like that could be a game changer. An SSRI in therapy is way preferable to judicial intervention. That's different from the guy who is predatory, who seeks out others to try to exploit and harm them, who's like really a menace, right? Those are people uh, you know, I don't want to, I don't want to speak in too much in absolutes, but for the most part, people like that we have not found ways to help them. And we've tried a lot. We've tried everything. Like that, essentially it comes down to there being, if you want to say there's just bad people, there are, in the single digits, some number of people that are just like that. And what to do with them it's easy. It's either easier or trickier depending on your perspective. The easy solution is find all those people and just like toss them away in a pit somewhere, right? Or like exile them to an island in the Pacific. But then there's the question of, do we really want to behave like that as a society, even towards people that we don't think are reformable?
Honestly, I would love to live in Hawaii if that's the Pacific island in question. So I think it depends on how we do it, honestly. There's a huge variation. I mean, people don't know this. I mean, people know that Australia was a penal colony, but also America was a penal colony. And I think that concept, it's an ancient one. Before Christianity came to Europe, there was a concept of exile, that you do something wrong and they don't kill you. In fact, the punishment for murder was not Hammurabi's code or whatever, eye for an eye. They said, no, if you murder somebody, we're not going to kill you, but you need to leave. Like, you need to go somewhere else. And I think that, as a moral system, it makes more sense to me than to say, like, because you did this bad thing, we collectively need this catharsis to like see you suffer in retribution for what you did. Maybe I'm more on like the mercy and forgiveness side of thing, where, I'm just interested in that what you did doesn't occur again to another person. And so you have to go somewhere else. But I don't have any desire to see the rest of your life be miserable and full of suffering, and we're going to get some. And I think as much as we're saying, and I'll put like a number 3% on it, could be more, could be less, but I'll say there's probably 3% of the country, different for different countries, but for our country, I'll say 3% of people who have some extreme antisocial tendencies. There's not much you could do in terms of like drugging them or therapy or whatever. And then I would say there's also a percentage of people, and there actually could be some overlap. In fact, I would suggest that there's heavy overlap between the types of people who are really antisocial toward innocent people, and then the types of people who have these, honestly, what I would say is a very low empathy, kind of like sadistic fantasy toward criminals. And we make a very clear, we almost think that those personality types are opposite. But the way I think is it's more of a horseshoe of the people who are most, and I've talked a little bit, I had an article in defense of psychos where I say that, like, a lot of cops are probably psychos. Like they're guys who they go into that profession. They're like, oh, I want to drive around in a car with a gun and go into dangerous neighborhoods and, potentially have to get in a shootout with somebody. It's like you might be a higher rate of psychopathic traits than if you want to be an accountant or something like that. Of course, there are psychopathic accountants as well. So we're not speaking in absolutes here. But it's like the people who fight crime and with psychology of the gangsters themselves, there's enough overlap there that when you get a really corrupt police department, like in LA, this happened, they actually, the anti-gang unit kind of formed its own gang, and it was a big controversy. So, it's something that I'm kind of suspicious of, like fighting fire with fire and saying like, these people are sadistic animals, therefore we need to treat them like sadistic animals. And I'm like,
right. Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's where I say we got to stop the cycle of violence, and we have to be empathetic to people, even who don't show us empathy. Now, the caveat on that is giving empathy to people, no matter what they've done, doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye to the threat that they present to others. And that's where I think people start to go off the rails, is when they say, oh, well, just let everybody out of jail. I mean, I don't think those sorts of people will ever, I don't view them as a real threat. Like the defund the police thing, well, the effect of that is that police funding increased, so I don't take those people that seriously. But I think there's that, there's an impulse on people who are more in favor of criminal justice to say, like, well, if you start talking about empathy for criminals, you're just going to let them all out of prison, and then we're going to have total anarchy and chaos, sort of thing.
But one thing I want to say, and I don't know if this is peripheral to your main point, but on the one hand, I get what I think you're saying, and it sounds like what you're saying is something like viewing like whatever, you know, the percentage of the like the incurable criminals, let's call it incurable, like as if it's kind of like it's a developmental brain disease, right? An underdevelopment of empathy and understanding of other humans on a human level, right? So it's like, well, in a certain sense, they should be pitied, and we should take all prudent means to remove them from us, like we would a malfunctioning robot that was attacking people, but not investing in like hating it and punishing it beyond that once the threat is removed. So I totally get that, but here's the one little bit of sand in the gears is I think it's a very different, it's one thing to say that about yourself, but it's a different thing to say like, hey, you know, you family who just got your kid murdered by this guy, you know, we really shouldn't feel, you know what I mean? Like he doesn't deserve to be punished. Really, like telling that to other people is, I think people don't really like that, and it's tough to do, and I think it goes against human nature. Like I think the view you're describing is one particular, or like the attitude you're talking about towards these criminals is one particular view, and I try to hold it myself when I can, but I also recognize, I think, that the need for human revenge when you have been wronged, although it's not something we want to indulge in and make the basis of the way we deal with justice, if we try to cut off that emotion, that instinct, the like, I've been wronged and I need to make things right somehow, then that, I think that is going to backfire. I don't think that's going to work. Like unless you have a society of bodhisattvas, that's not really going to work. Do you see what I'm getting at?
I'm arguing for a Buddhist theocracy where we're ruled over by bodhisattvas. Yeah.
Like, where would you send sorry, just to add on maybe a second question, just because you were getting at this of like segregating off these, you know, people, but you don't want to send them to a nice resort in Hawaii. What did you have in mind, like, other than segregating them, like, into a prison, right? Like, what were you thinking?
Okay, so there's a lot of diverse options, and I don't believe there's a one size fits all approach. I think that if people commit terrorism, I think if they're involved politically with international terrorist organizations, you know, if a Hamas member, you know, comes over and puts off a bomb in Times Square or tries to do that, I don't think we should say, oh, well, you're going to Hawaii now, or
right.
And you know, I'm generally not in favor of the death penalty, especially in the case where you have someone where they could provide valuable intelligence, or in a prisoner swap potentially, you know, in a hostage situation, you know. So I don't think that a lot of people are kind of quick to say like, just execute everybody who's evil and bad. Sometimes it's not a good situation. Sometimes, like, let's say there was a North Korean citizen who committed an act of terrorism. We caught that person. You know, you might want to engage in negotiation with North Korea, and maybe rather than killing that person. Also, there's a problem of martyrs. Like when you have terrorism and you kill the terrorist, that can actually inflame terrorism further. So I think in those cases, and that's like less than 1% of all criminal cases, I think in those cases, having a supermax prison facility where those people are kept under lock and key, they're kept in a cage, and I don't really care. I don't actually, I mean, I know I'm making like this Buddhist, we have to have empathy with criminal stuff, but
I think, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm just saying that I think that there are probably, out of the millions of people in our country who have been in and out of the prison system in some way or another, or the criminal justice system in general, I think that, again, there's maybe like at most 100,000 people who should ever, and I think that's even low. I think it could be smaller, like 10,000. But we have Guantanamo Bay, and I think that's actually appropriate. And there were a lot of people on the left who were expecting Obama to close that, and they were saying, yeah, this is terrible. Guantanamo, it's this black site, and it's violating human rights. And it's like, we do need to have a different set of rules for different types of crime. Not all crime is the same, and Guantanamo Bay might be appropriate for certain kinds of crime. And it might even be appropriate that it's not located in the United States. If that's what makes sense because of our legal bureaucracy and our constitution or whatever, it's like that might be the most practical solution to that problem. But on the other hand, and you've referenced this, there are people who commit, let's say, for example, a teenager is with his friends in his car. Maybe he smoked a little bit, he drank a little bit. He's going 100 miles an hour, and he hits a mother with a stroller. And now that's 2 murder charges. And we've heard of stories like this, and I look into the sentencing, and obviously you have a family that wants to see justice done. Maybe they want some revenge. But, I look at that and I say, it's not impossible that this person was a psychopath or that they had some kind of criminal intent. But it's important for me that we consider, what led up to that in terms of, assessing like a murder charge and how we deal with that. We have different degrees of murder, and I think it's good that we have first through third degree and we have manslaughter. But I think it's really important that when we decide what to do with people, and of course, there's so many more crimes other than murder that people get put in prison for. Trump had the First Step Act where he said, if someone's a non-violent offender, if they're a drug dealer, they're selling drugs to people, it's not good. But we have this problem of maybe putting people in prison is bad, and therefore we're going to release these people. I think that people who are drug dealers, drugs are harmful. They actively harm people, and I think there's a case to be made. I mean, we could get into like legalizing drugs, and it's sort of a separate issue. But let's just accept for the moment that drugs are bad, and you shouldn't sell drugs to people. I don't think that if someone is really a nonviolent offender and they're just like, okay, I didn't want to hurt anybody. I guess drugs are bad, but I wanted to make some money. That's like, we connect that to murder. We assume that murderers and drug dealers are the same. And I think psychiatry can be helpful in terms of like the psychometrics of personality and developing tests for people and saying like, a dystopian vision might be we just test everybody and figure out who's good and bad before they even commit the crime, like predictive measures. But at the very least, you've committed a crime. You've been assessed as guilty. And so we really need to dial down and spend a lot of time figuring out who you are, what makes you tick on a very deep level. What type of recidivism are you likely to engage in? Because every criminal has a high rate of recidivism, but what type of recidivism is that? So, for example, if it's a white-collar crime, do we need to put white-collar criminals in jail? I mean, maybe you stole thousands of dollars for your company, but I think what we need to do is we need to basically monitor your financial transactions, and maybe you have a parole officer or something, and you have to pay a fine, you have to pay restitution. But yeah, putting people in jail seems weird to me.
I think white-collar, to my mind, and again, some of this is just my intuition, white-collar crime seems like it would be vastly easier to, quote, manage, because most white-collar criminals, are people hooked into society. They want to maintain that way, or they want to maintain themselves. They often have an image and a reputation, and even if they are, antisocial, like a popular example is like someone who's antisocial but intelligent enough to stay out of trouble and becomes a surgeon, right? And uses that lack of empathy actually for good, right? That's like a kind of a caricatured example. But
the butt is coming.
Yeah, I'm just
I wanted to address something you said earlier really quick.
Yeah.
We're hitting on a ton of different points, so it's not like this is not going to be like an ordered essay or something.
That's right. You can keep me more focused. That's fine.
Yeah. So you said that you really what you would like ideally from that almost a Pavlovian theory of crime and punishment is that we want the punishment to be as close chronologically to the crime as possible. And we do have an extreme problem in this country with the duration of the pre-trial period. And it's extremely offensive to me, and it makes me feel like I don't live in a serious country when I hear a story about someone who's been sitting in jail and they haven't had a trial for years. And now, in some cases, is that the prosecutor's fault? Is that the defense attorney's fault? I don't really care whose fault it is. This is a waste of taxpayer money. This is a drain on the economy. This isn't just. This isn't the way. But I understand, on the other hand, we have a complex bureaucracy. Things happen, and people fall through the cracks, or the system's not perfect. Okay, so how can we give people more options to have speedier trials? And I would say that we have this concept of a jury trial, which is that you get 12 people together, you get the prosecution, you get your defense, and there's a judge, and it's a very structured, traditional system, English common law, and then we deliver a verdict, and then there's sentencing. So it's this whole process. And I would say for some people, they should be given the elective choice to say, I know I have a right to a jury trial, but we don't always have speedy trials in this country. Optimally, I would say, we should just make sure every trial is speedy. But if that's not happening, at least give people the option to say, I'm going to, and this is maybe controversial, but other countries do it, is I'm just going to elect to stand before a judge. The judge is going to look through the evidence, and the judge is going to make a decision. And, that's going to afford people speedy trials. Now, is that going to be more or less fair to people? I mean, it depends on.
Well, but if you're electing to do it,
yeah.
if the defendant is electing to do it, because I agree, by the way, I think like there's the expression justice delayed is justice denied. And that, I'm actually personally surprised that the level of like vigilantism in our country isn't higher, just given how, broken the criminal justice system is in so many ways, including this slowness. Like the families of a victim waiting, not even knowing, like, is this guy, maybe he's going to get like put on bail, just nobody knows. Will people even get punished? There's a huge, you probably know better than I do, but like the overwhelming majority of cases is just a plea deal, right? So yeah, I don't know. That's a huge problem. I mean, we are a huge country. It is a huge problem. A ton of things are illegal. It's an interesting question of how much, part of my instinct is to say, this is one of those like kind of slash and burn strategies that's very unsubtle, so probably doesn't work, but is to say, look, maybe we just need to make way fewer things illegal and raise the bar dramatically, or maybe not dramatically, but like some significant amount for just what even qualifies as police attention. But if it does qualify for police attention, it is very, very serious attention. It's not the Keystone Cop situation that we have. This gets into another idea. I'm just adding this in here that I wish, I'm against the militarization of police in the way like you'd read about in Reason Magazine or something. But I would be in favor of our police basically being a more elite force that Americans could be proud of. Like, we're in America, the people protecting us domestically, we should respect them in the same way we like respect and honor our soldiers abroad. You know what I mean? And so soldiers train for months, before going on a deployment. And many police get like a couple half days of training a year or something. It's like, it's ludicrous. A guy who goes to the local gun range pretty regularly might be a better shot than many police officers. That's very possible. So higher bar for crimes. And when you do that, you're in very serious trouble. We're not messing around anymore, and things are much more swift. That's one idea. But then there's all the problems that come with that I haven't thought through.
I mean, the phrase that I would use is defund and refund. Defund and refund, because I'm in 100% agreement that, for example, just look at our murder clearance rates, meaning that when there is a murder, we've identified a murder victim, we found a body, we need to find out who murdered that person. like we need to have like a 90% success rate, because there's too many tools available. There's too many cameras. Everybody's got a cell phone in their pocket, which is essentially a GPS. We have all the records. Look, if an important person gets murdered in this country, the clearance rate is like 99%. But then you look at communities where the policing is very bad and possibly corrupt, and the murder clearance rate has been plummeting, and to just unacceptable. Like, it shouldn't be a coin flip of whether we're going to find the murderer. That's really not acceptable, given that in the past, when we had less forensics, less fingerprinting, less databases, we had a higher clearance rate. Now, some people might say it's because we were accusing people who weren't guilty, and we were putting people, maybe that's a counter argument. But I don't think actually it was like a 50% like false accusation thing, and DNA evidence can help with that. So I'm in total agreement that. And look, maybe this is just because I like to speed, but I think that we have a lot of police presence on our roads, which is dedicated toward catching people doing traffic violations. And, it's important that we have, like, obviously traffic violations can lead to a large number of deaths, like 10,000 people per year die in car accidents. So obviously I don't want drunk drivers on the road. I don't want people, speeding in a suburban neighborhood and things like that. But I haven't looked at the numbers. There's a future article I would like to do the research for and figure out what are police departments spending on different types of crime. What are they spending on internet crime, fraud, economic crime, white collar crime? What do they spend? And to me, I would just say, like, I don't want to just defund everything and make everything legal. And then, we only prosecute murder. But in terms of harm, I mean, we're talking about when a person dies, I mean, there's a number of ways that you can, from a public policy standpoint, obviously on a personal standpoint, someone dies that is close to you, there's no monetary value, right? You can't talk in those terms. But in terms of, we have a police force, they have a budget. How much of that budget should be dedicated toward exactly what you're saying, an elite force of people who are extremely good at clearing murders?
Well, there's also the question of this murder clearance. No, I agree. How, and I don't know, but I have a guess. What is the distribution or the variance in clearance, depending on whether you're talking about South Side of Chicago, some parts of St. Louis, or when some suburban mom gets murdered in, some freak act, thing, right? My guess, those cases get solved much more often. And the ones in, the inner city, right? The inner city cases don't get solved mainly for two reasons. One, it might be I don't know the numbers, but I could easily imagine under investment, lack of personnel, et cetera, but also lack of cooperation. A lot of those murders involve cases where there's multiple criminal parties, and a no snitching culture is very powerful, right? And so that's another, and so you were talking about, tailoring, criminal justice to who you're dealing with, but then that gets into, for the United States, the extremely sticky situation of, treating people differently based on ethnicity, which is something, most of us are pretty hesitant to go there. That doesn't seem very wise to do that. So,
yeah, there are huge racial disparities in clearance rates, and it's absolutely true. A mom murdered in the suburbs, we're going to clear that murder. Murder in the South Side of Chicago, good luck. I mean, and the problem with that is, when you don't clear murders, you're sending a clear signal to criminals of, like, you'll probably get away with it, so why not? Why not go kill another person? And that takes that, again, there's a 3% in these, like, if we went to the South Side of Chicago, 97% of people are not murderers, but there are 3% of people who are murderers, and like, we need to find out who they are, and we need to take them off the streets of the South Side of Chicago. So in order to do that, this is why, defund and refund is, we as a country, if we really want to bring down the number of absolute crime, the most effective way that we can do that is, unfortunately, life is about trade-offs, and you can't, to get one thing, you have to give something else up. And so it is, I'm sure that somebody living in a suburb of Burlington, Vermont, Although actually they're pretty in favor of defunding the police over in there, so maybe they would be
Yeah, yeah.
fine, But I'm sure like a suburb of Durham, North Carolina, or something. They are like, well, we have a large tax base, we have a big budget, we can afford really good policing here, even though we might not need it. But we're going to have this awesome police force. And then the south side of Chicago, it's like, well, there's a greater rate of poverty, the budget's tight, there's a lot of people, and so you're just going to end up with an insufficient police force, or again, even a corrupt police force that is like the police aren't even doing their jobs, or they might even be complicit in crimes, or they're apathetic and they don't really want to do their jobs. And so taking money and resources away from the suburbs of Durham and injecting that into the south side of Chicago, and also involving much greater federal funding, and saying that if we have a cultural problem in a specific area where a police force is not doing its job, and we're throwing money at it, and it's like a black hole, and we don't even know where the money goes, and there are these problems with corruption, then having federal agents who are not steeped in that local culture, which may be very sticky and difficult to reform from within, bringing people from the outside, fresh blood in, people who, are coming from a different context and, have the privilege to not grow up with crime as normalized, or have that apathetic, people who are like, take someone from Durham, take someone from Vermont and put them in the South Side. I mean, this is kind of the fantasy of the K through 12 teacher. Like, I'm going to go into the inner city and I'm going to teach these kids and I'm going to solve all these problems. That is not super effective, and I can admit that. But in terms of policing, if you have police which are not doing very well, and then you're taking in people, again, at a level of the FBI, people who are elite, people from around the country, people who are intelligent, educated, they know how to use these tools. They're using the best tools available. They're highly motivated. They're idealistic. You put them in these situations which are very bad. I mean, some of our cities, St. Louis, competes regularly for the number one violent, more violent than any city in Brazil, more violent than any city in Mexico. So putting those people there, I think it could be part of the solution, not the whole solution. It's not going to be solved overnight either.
Well, that's an interesting idea. I don't know enough about police or culture to say, how will outsiders be viewed, and will they be tolerated? I agree. Everything I've seen about the, kind of structural and organizational issues with the police leads me to believe that there's a lot of problems. But so there's sort of two ways of looking at this. And I want to, on the one hand, there's a way of looking at American policing where it looks like a total disaster, right? It's like got all the biggest problems of unions, corruption, incompetence. Just like it looks terrible, right? But then on the other hand, when you look, there's a lot of statistics that when you look at them, it doesn't actually look so bad. Like when you look at the amount of violence, police violence compared to just like the number of encounters they have with people all over this country. And Americans we're violent people, like reasonably so, moderately violent people. So like being a police officer here is not without its risks, and police officers get attacked all the time. And so there could be way more things like those shootings than there are. And so that makes me think of the following. We've been focusing a lot on the policing, the quality of policing, which is fair, but from like the macro perspective, I wonder how much does the policing matter really for the criminality of a society? And here's the analogy. It's sort of like saying like, oh, like, why are these people over here so healthy? It's like, because they have such great doctors, right? And like, that's never the reason. They're healthy because they're healthy people. And, maybe they can afford good doctors or something like, but most people are not criminals because they're just not criminal people. Like, it's really about the people. And so I guess I just want to avoid when we're looking at sort of the causal factors of crime and what we can do about it, of just looking at deficiencies in police at the expense of other factors, which are many.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not just in other words, just to restate more succinctly, America's crime problem is not simply a function of bad policing, which I'm not saying you were saying that, but
No, absolutely, and that's kind of where I was getting at with, um, you know, in my opinion, I've always, and maybe this is wrong, and maybe there's like evidence that, having a police car every 5 miles on the highway, catching people going 15 miles over the speed limit or whatever, maybe that is a really good program, but it's not in the short term. It's not very obvious to me that that is a great program, and so I guess I think that I'm pretty cynical about the effect of police. Like, let's say on every street corner in America, we had a police officer. Like, we increased 100-fold somehow. We imported like millions of police officers from Mars or something, and there's police officers everywhere. Would murder stop? Even though there's like 100% chance like the cop's gonna catch you and like he's gonna see you doing it right there. No, murders wouldn't stop. People would still even if there was 100% clearance rate, people would still commit murders. And so in the same way that we don't have great tools, and maybe there are these theoretical tools, but we haven't developed tools to destroy recidivism, to reduce recidivism to an acceptable level. We also don't have such great tools to prevent crime. We have better tools at preventing crime. I think that like having a police car in the neighborhood and doing patrols is probably it's a more effective tool than like giving therapy to prisoners or something like that. But where I would focus is clearance. You have to catch the people, you have to identify them, you have to remove them. You have to do it immediately, you have to do it as soon as possible. And there is no reason why people should have a 50-50 shot of killing somebody and getting the chance to kill somebody else. When you kill somebody,
right,
we need to know ASAP, and we need to stop it from happening again. And by doing that, because you look historically at the clearance to today, I think we could cut murders in half. Like if we're able to make those reforms. And so to me, clearance is not about having more cars on the street and more patrols and more police encounters that you're talking about. Someone calls and says, oh, I've got, this issue, or, these people are doing, it's like, did somebody get murdered or not? And here's the sad fact. And actually, I think gun owners have, and actually Kamala Harris recently said, like, if you come into my house, like, you're getting shot. And the reason she said that, and the reason that was kind of a, an applause moment, is because we all recognize that even if the police are only 15 minutes away, which, by the way, they're usually not only 15 minutes away, but even if they're only 15 minutes away, if you're being burglarized, if you're being assaulted, if there's a murder about to happen, the police are not going to help you. They're not going to protect you. They're not preventative. And so I'm not saying they have zero role to play in that, but I would say I would want to shift the emphasis away from prevention and protection, which is the way we like to think about police. I think on an instinctual level, we want big men with guns who are strong to be our knights in shining armor and protect us. The sad truth is that if somebody wants to assault a random person or a vulnerable person, like, they're probably going to be successful. And in terms of, as tragic as that is, our job is to identify them quickly and make sure they never do it again.
Like, the ideal is like, it's like from Minority Report, except we don't have pre-crime, but the way they like just sweep, like do zip line in or whatever and like drag the guy out. Yeah, have you seen the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise? Amazing movie. Like, like right after the murder happens, we want those guys parachuting in and like bringing them out. Like that's as close as we can get to that. I agree. I think that's I agree with that. This also just makes me think about the kind of this balance of, there's many kinds of societies that have low crime with varying kinds of police, right? You can find, and I'm not an expert here, so I'm probably gonna say something wrong, but I would imagine there's many places in China, for example, if you go, there's basically police on every corner, or military, whatever they are, right? But like, and I've heard people say when they visit, they're like, they've never felt safer. They know no one is going to mess with them. How much of that is due to the military police presence? How much of it is due to the courteousness and politeness of the Chinese people? I don't know. But then there's other places, maybe, I don't know what the police presence is like, say in Japan or, Switzerland, but maybe you go around and you may not see much police at all, but it's still completely safe, right? And then there's all sorts of other societies that are between. And it makes me wonder about maybe a trade-off of, in our country, how in the United States, how if we want to kind of clamp down on crime, not just with murders, but significant crime, right, across the population, that is going to take that might take a fair amount of invasion of privacy. I mean, or just a kind of our lives becoming about policing in a way. And so then we have to ask, okay, how much crime are we willing to sort of just tolerate and look the other way about, right? So this is, basically saying it either explicitly or implicitly, in our neighborhood is good. That other neighborhood, on the other side of the city is not good, but we don't actually care about that. We're not going to agonize over it. They're going to do what they do. So we have to figure out how much are we, we're not like that right now. That's not the way we are. We, if there's a community that's, suffering, we want to try to lift it up and make it better. And not just say, oh, you're relegated to being a crime-ridden community because that's the kind of people you are, right? That's not a very American thing to say, I don't think. And so, but I don't know where does the balance lie, right? Like how much are we going to invade people's lives and really clamp down on people's freedoms or whatever needs to be done at the expense of safety? That's not an easy question.
Yeah, I mean, if you have so many different examples, like you said. Like, I'll give an anecdote. Rwanda, which I think of a genocide. I think it's pretty bad. It's in sub-Saharan Africa. There's probably a high crime rate. But I had a friend who went there for a conference, and he said he asked the taxi driver. He said, is it safe to walk around at night? And the taxi driver said, oh, it's very safe. If you commit a crime, we just kill you. And it's not that there's police, but it's the actual military. This happens in South America as well. They don't have this distinction between the police and the military. And so to my earlier point about defund and refund, and kind of nationalizing the police, where I don't want to nationalize the police. I don't want to militarize the police of Burlington, Vermont. I don't want to militarize the suburbs of Durham, North Carolina. But I think we do need to militarize, not from a protective and preventative, but from a post-crime cleanup action force, super powered, superhero people. We need to have like a very swift, dramatic response. And in these countries where they struggle with crime because there's a high rate of violence, there's not a big budget, they realize that nationalizing the police and having military officers who aren't from that particular neighborhood, because when you have a crime-ridden neighborhood and then you select some kid from that neighborhood to be a police officer, there's a lot of almost conflicts of interest that come with that. And bringing someone from outside the community to do that, actually Machiavelli sort of writes about this in The Prince. He says, if you want to govern a country, you should not just rely upon the people to police themselves, but you should take people from the areas where you've already conquered and it's already established the rule of law, and you should put them in those places to rule over those people, because just expecting them to take care of themselves isn't going to work out very well. It's kind of a stretch there, but that would be my analogy.
No, I think I like the Machiavelli reference. That's fascinating. I see the logic in that. And the one thing that's sort of popping into my mind is it's interesting how at odds that is with what I think is another strain of thinking that in not only in criminal justice, but a lot of things of localism, right? The idea of like, we want, in my field, right, it's like, black patients being able to see black doctors if that's what they want, or people implicitly assume that's what they want. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But like same with police, right? A lot of people might say, no, we want the police brought from the local community, bottom up, homegrown. And you're saying, no, we don't want that. We want the exact opposite. Is
Absolutely.
that right?
Yeah, I mean, and this really hit for me with the Ferguson riots, and also prior, the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case, where the entire contention was, we're not mad because there was a murder, we're mad because of the racial dynamics of the murder. And I said, this is not helpful. This is not helping white people. It's not helping black people. And this is not empowering people or increasing their self-esteem or erasing racism or whatever you think it's doing. What you are doing is you're saying, well, rather than, taking the people, because this happens anytime, really any form of affirmative action or a situation where you say, you know what, instead of just having a meritocracy and putting out and saying like, who wants to be a cop? And then, some percentage of white guys, some percentage of black guys, some percentage of Hispanic, Asian, whatever, they all raise their hands. And then you say, no, we're not just going to select among you. We're going to create a quota where now, we need more black cops in black areas, and we expect that to produce a better outcome. You're inherently, whenever you narrow your application pool based on some kind of like a race-based quota, you're necessarily going to have worse outcomes. It's going to happen in academia, it's going to happen in the professional world, it's going to happen in policing. But again, the other problem is that, and I have been working on an article where I actually look into the likelihood of gang affiliations by race. And the relevance of that is not to say that if you're a member of this race, you're a gangster, you're a criminal. But it's to say that if you grow up in a social situation, everyone has a social scene that includes their family, their close friends, their classmates. And so if within your social scene, you may not be a criminal, but you grow up making friendships and going to barbecues and hanging out with people who are criminals, who are known criminals, then that biases your view of crime. It changes your perception. I was fortunate enough to not grow up around that. I did not have the experience of growing up around drug addicts and criminals and those sorts of things. And some of those people, I'm sure, because they have that experience, they are even more anti-crime than I am because, their life experience has motivated them to fight crime. But, for a lot of people, the effect is actually the opposite. They become more tolerant. They become more complacent. It's more normalized. I'm arguing for empathy.
Part of life.
I've tried to make that clear that I want to have empathy for criminals, but at the same time, it depends on the type of empathy we're talking about. I'm talking about the empathy that we have in terms of our punishment system and our correction system, but in terms of policing, and when you go into a community and you say, hey, there was a murder. Do you know anything about what happened? Oh, no, I didn't see anything. Okay, have a nice day. That's not the correct approach. There's a murder that happens. Those people, like the potential witnesses, like you need to make it clear, we're not going away. We're not forgetting about this. We're not walking away from this community, because when there's a mix, I think a lot of the popular perception from people who have never lived in the black neighborhood. I used to work in a 90% black workplace where all my coworkers were black, right? So I get to talk to these people, and a lot of them actually were single mothers, and I wouldn't even ask them about it. They just talk to themselves and bring it up in conversation in the break room and say, you know what? I'm really upset and I'm really scared because there was a shooting last weekend and the police didn't do anything. And how am I supposed to raise a kid in this situation? And what kind of example is that to my children? And how are we going to break out of this, cycle if we don't have people who are here to fix this problem? And so as much as in the media, I think the story is these people feel persecuted. It's black genocide when these cops shoot people. They want to get the police out. They want to defund them. That isn't always the story on the ground. And when we talk about the empathy and the localism and giving people, and I want to make the caveat that if someone wants a black therapist and they're black and they think that's helpful to them, that's a completely different situation from we're trying to solve crime in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Just to say, no, I hear what you're saying, and I totally agree about the misrepresentation of people in black or other minority communities. Right, their views of police are they might be negative, but they're not as one-dimensional as is portrayed in the media. That's for sure. I mean, nothing is that one-dimensional. But in terms of police training, so I think you bring up some good points, and I think this just cannot be said often enough that the total racialization of these police shootings and police violence and policing in our country has been totally toxic and unproductive and unhelpful in every conceivable way, and it has led to nothing good at all. Right? And it muddies the problem because it covers over. It's first off, it's not the problem, right? Like racism for in terms of the all the problems with policing, even granting however many racist cops there are, right? Which is probably more than in accounting, as you said, right? It's that's not the primary problem. There is a broad structural competence training problem in terms of the kinds of people that are being accepted to police academies, vetted or not vetted. How are they trained? How well is their training maintained? Can incompetent cops be fired? Right. So like a lot of times you look at a cop who, especially the ones where it is just obvious he did something bad, right? Where it's just very clear the body cam footage is there. And it turns out, oh, he, got transferred from 5 previous departments, I think there was the case recently, right? Of
Yeah,
the
the
guy who,
shooting. He was
the
from
woman with the
Illinois.
pot of water or
Yeah,
something, like
yeah.
the guy with the pot, who shot the white cop shot the black woman with a pot of water. And I didn't follow the case closely. It looked like she may have been unwell in some way, but like it seemed the consensus was he really effed that one up big time. And didn't he have a kind of a checkered past that it sounded
He
not
was.
racial? It just sounded like he was an idiot or a bully, maybe, I don't know, but just
Well, look, I think that a guy like that has. I don't think he. That's a. I actually that was my article on defending psychopaths in defense of psychopaths. It was covering that case and going through the implications. And so I think a
mhm,
guy like that. I hope that someone like that has a place in our society, but he does not have a place in an elite, competent police force, because it wasn't just that he was transferred around they kept kicking him around because they realized you're no good, go somewhere
right.
else. Which is, it's almost like when you have a homelessness problem and you kick them out of one street corner so they can go sleep on another street. You're not solving the problem. And he
This is a
was,
problem everywhere.
yeah,
This is a problem everywhere. And I mean, I'll let you finish, but just to say, like the uh, this is not just a police problem. This is I think, a society-wide problem where the buck never stops anywhere. Increasingly, you see fewer times where someone just really takes responsibility and takes ownership for something, where someone just says, "Hey guys, I fucked up. This was my mistake. Here's what I did wrong, and if you're not going to throw me out immediately, here's the steps I'm going to take to make it right." Right? That we don't often hear that kind of thing these days. And whether it's cops, teachers, we see it in healthcare, and it's not as bad because it's not a totally unionized situation. But in residency, in med schools and residencies, for example, um, students who are either not competent or just not cut out for it, or characterologically kind of questionable, unless it's truly egregious, like just utterly beyond the pale, pretty bad behavior can be swept under the rug. People get transferred from residency to residency. That's not super common, but it happens. It's hard to fire incompetent people, and this is a big problem. I don't know what to do about it, but it's growing. I think that's my sense. I'm open to being wrong.
yeah. And my solution is we gotta widen the applicant pool, and the way we do that is we say this is our country. What happens in Chicago matters to what happens in for the people of Vermont. Like we care what happens in this country. We are not 50 independent sovereign nations. We are one country. And when we talk about these problems, obviously we have to acknowledge that the situation is different. And I feel the same exact way about what I would call vagrancy, because I think homelessness again is mischaracterizing the problem. If you built homes for these people and put them in the homes, their quality of life would not improve in many cases, because what you're actually
Correct.
dealing with is vagrancy, which is an ancient problem. It didn't start 20 years ago or something. People have been vagrants for thousands of years because it is characterized by deep psychological disturbances that cause a person not to be able to function in society. They don't abide by the norms. Now we have drugs that are amplifying those conditions, making them worse and more frequent, more common. I'm kind of a crusader against marijuana use, because I think that amplifies our rates of schizophrenia and activates those latent potentials.
That's possible. I would say, just to add, the vagrancy thing is well taken, but I just want to add one uh, element to that, which is like, yes, there are and always have been some group of people, like, the proverbial, like, guy who's always like wandering from railroad to railroad. He lives, or something like that, right? Lives on the other side of the tracks and is kind of just fine with it, living alone, and he might be weird, but not obviously mentally ill in a severe way, right? I think those are the people that have always been with us and always will. Another part of our homeless problem is, I think, people that are, truly mentally ill and would not choose to be in that situation necessarily if they were well for a period of time. And we have just given up on them. Like, once we closed the asylums, the state hospitals in, the 60s, 70s, in those mid-century decades, we handed them over to the community, which has had, let's say, mixed results at best. So I do take, I guess I want to, there are some people who I'm fine saying, like, there's going to be some people who are just the transients, but like hobos, whatever you want to call them, but not all of them are like that. Some of this, I think some definitely do need help.
No, I think the majority of them need help.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, no, I'm not saying they enjoy living like that they want to live like that, but I'm saying it's not a problem of building houses. Now, I will admit that we have a housing crisis in this country. Housing prices are way too high. There's a lot of reasons for that, but that is a separate and distinct problem. And people choose to conflate those problems for emotional propaganda to say that, oh, you don't want to support. And look, I support building, and like I'm a yes in my backyard. Like, let's do it. But that's not going to solve homelessness. It's not homelessness. It's not a lack of a home that's the cause. That is a symptom. The cause
Right.
is mental health and drug
Yeah.
addiction.
They're unable to maintain the lifestyle of the person who has a regular home and life and routine. It is a failure. And this is, I think, a fail. This is, I don't want to tell people what they're thinking, but it seems to me that sometimes when people are really not understanding this point that you're making, it's because maybe it's a deep-seated egalitarianism or something, but it's like this belief that, like, everyone, it's not that like everyone is as smart as I am, or that they overestimate people's intelligence, but they do. They like overestimate the wherewithal of many people, of like, oh, well, why is this person still homeless? We have this extremely robust, complicated federal bureaucracy that if the homeless guy just follows this 47,000 steps, then he can be hooked up with resources from 13 disconnected agencies. And it's like, dude, these people do not have the wherewithal. A sane, intelligent person gets furious on the phone with their health insurance, when things aren't working. Try doing that with schizophrenia, right? Like, or when you have a meth problem, like, it's impossible. It's totally impossible. And so I don't know, like, have these people never met seriously impaired people who don't know how to conduct their lives? They just assume everyone knows knows how to, like, go to work and have a paycheck and pay rent. I don't know.
No, it's a moral problem. It's people who are desperate to be good, and they believe that the only way to be good is to deny reality. And so it doesn't matter what sort of arguments you make. They're committed religious fanatics that, this is an axiom of my religion, that and the thing is, I've had firsthand experience in terms of I had a job where I was going in because the sad fact is, let's say a father dies and his son is a junkie, and the junkie inherits the house. What's going to happen to that house? That house is now going to become a trap house, where the junkie is going to invite all of his junkie friends into his trap house, and they're going to destroy the house. And I had the privilege to go into those houses and prepare them for demolition, because they were so beyond, like, the cost to refurbish the house with all of the mold damage and all of the, everything that had gone on. That was greater than just to demolish the house, keep the price of the land, and build something new. And so when I saw that, I realized there were people with such deep-seated issues that you can give them a free house and it will not solve their issues. They will just destroy the house, and then they're still going to have their issues. So if we want to solve their issues, we do have to identify them and we have to give them some form of treatment and try to protect them from their own problems. Now, with mentally ill people, that is harder than with criminals, because with criminals, we say you've committed a crime, you've lost a certain number of your rights. And so, normally you have the right to walk around free and do whatever you want. Okay, you're a criminal, you've lost some of your rights. And so now we have more leverage with those people of what we can do with them. With mentally ill people, there is like a moral and a legal problem of, okay, how mentally ill does a person have to be before we institutionalize them and put them in an asylum? And that is one of the, and I think that is a bigger problem for me, because, there are people who are wacky, people who are zany, and I've heard stories of like, oh, I got in a fight with somebody, and so I forget what the term is, but there's a term when you call the cops and you say, oh, this person's having a mental breakdown, they need to be hospitalized. And it's a fake thing. And then, the person doesn't get punished for making the call. So I think there's ways those systems can be abused. And, I want to be sensitive to that. But I think that's why psychological assessment is such an important field that we need to utilize. And it's actually not that hard. Like, if someone is clearly mentally ill and they're living on the street, we need to be able to identify that and say, okay, this is not a conducive environment for you. You're hurting yourself. You're harming yourself. We need to put you in an environment where you don't have access to drugs.
Yeah, that's not hard. No, the assessment part's easy. Like I don't want to say, but like relatively speaking, it is not difficult to diagnose severe chronic mental illness. It's usually obvious. The thing that we lack is some combination of a will to do something, and probably also just totally hamstrung by our own bureaucracy and just like the bloat of everything. It just takes a long time to implement a solution. But just to say, I think one overriding concern here, if we're like pivoting to the mental illness part, this applies to the criminal justice to some degree too, is how paternalistic do we want to be? I just mean in a very general sense, right? For people who are unable to conduct their own lives in a way that we deem like kind of minimally appropriate. What is the bar for that, for intruding? And in America, in the United States, it is a very high bar for intruding on someone's life in most cases. Like, I guess the government intrudes in our lives all the time in a certain sense, all the way, but like this kind of really invasive intrusion, like DCFS taking someone's kids away, that's actually that doesn't happen. That, you got to call them a lot before they'll take someone's kids away. Just to say that there's a large number of people, mental illness, drugs, just can't deal with themselves, can't conduct their lives independently. What do we do with them, right? Our society does not have a good answer once robust families are taken out of the picture, right? Because then we're left with asylums, but like, you can't put people who maybe are not seriously mentally ill, but just like aren't great at doing life. Like, you can't put them in asylums. And there's a lot of people who are sort of borderline cases. What do you do with them? I think we would have to start thinking pretty creatively in terms of social engineering, social organization of like, what do you do with large numbers of people that really kind of need semi-custodial care, essentially?
So when I road tripped around the country, I found this place in Southern California called Slab City. And Slab City's federal property. It was an old military base. It was decommissioned. There's probably high levels of radiation. There's probably unexploded ordnance. Don't go there and have a time and blame me for it. So I've given you the disclaimer. But I did go there. I was there and I did a little documentary about it. I might eventually, but if I had time someday, I would make it more substantial. Do some editing, but essentially I just documented, who are the people out there? What do they think? Why are they out there? What are they doing? And, you learn that the majority of people out there are on food stamps. The majority of people out there are on welfare. And I said, one of the questions was like, okay, so you guys don't own the land. You're not paying rent. you've just, a lot of them have RVs, or they have, tents or whatever kind of structure. It's like, so are you guys homeless? And they're like, no one here is homeless. We all have our own place. Like, we're not on the street begging for money. We're not, I mean, probably there is significant drug use, but, we're not, it's not like on the streets of San Francisco.
Is it like squatting? I'm not familiar with this. Is it
Yeah.
basically like the feds are sort of turning a blind eye, and it's like, if anyone wants to squat here, as long as they're not causing too much trouble, that's fine. And it's sort of like a place where it's like, you can go and kind of have a subsidized, I don't want to call it a non-life. I don't want to judge these people, but it's sort of like, it seems like, are you talking about like giving up in like the wider world, and you're just like living in this federal land on food stamps?
Yeah. So I don't think that specific model is helpful to maybe the majority of people who have problems. But I think it's
But am I describing it correctly? Like, am I understanding like
Yeah.
kind of what it is? Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
there are
Okay.
people.
Interesting.
There are people who have. Now it depends on the time of year, because this is in the Sonoran Desert. So in the summertime, it's like 120 degrees outside. You can't
Oh,
think. You can't run around. I mean, you're basically just
right.
sweating and drinking water. Um, and in the wintertime, they have parties, they have festivals, and it's kind of like a poor man's Burning Man. Like, instead of millionaires going out there and partying, it's like it's like poor people going out and partying.
I got to
But
look this up.
yeah, yeah, it's an interesting place. And to me, like, when they said no, we're not homeless, I just thought, yeah, I mean, the problem, and I think San Francisco is improving, hopefully, but the image of homeless people with encampment, like, we want to have nice cities. Okay, this is just, and maybe I'm just an aesthetic supremacist, or I just like the idea of having the shining city on the hill. But I'm like, cities are very wealthy. Cities should look nice. There's an economic benefit to tourism. There's maybe a sense of national pride we get when you walk around a great American city and say, "Wow, it's clean." And that's what, frankly, I'm a critic of Tucker Carlson, and when he went to the Moscow subway, he said it's so much cleaner, and I was like, we shouldn't be losing to Russia on this, and so it's like, as much as I think I question his motives in pointing that out, he has a point, and it's like, how do we make these cities clean? Well, there's a lot of ways, but one of those ways is we shouldn't have tent encampments everywhere. But then the question is, there are people living in these tents. Where are they going to go? And I think we should provide spaces. I mean, it is a big country. We should provide spaces where we are taking care of these people to the best of our ability. But we're not doing it in San Francisco, because the cost of rent in San Francisco is $3,000 a month for a tiny little bedroom. So it's not appropriate to try to, again, this localist mentality. It's so pervasive. I don't know exactly what the spiritual roots of it are or something, but that idea that, oh, this person is homeless in San Francisco, so we have to get them an apartment in San Francisco. No, we don't. We can put them on a bus, and they could literally live anywhere. And because everything is cheaper outside San Francisco, so it doesn't really matter where you go. You're going to have more cash to help per person. That's going to benefit the person. That's going to benefit San Francisco. So yeah, that's why I'm in favor of pretty much when we have a problem where we're failing. Now, if it's succeeding, like if you have a local school and that school is doing great and it's all locally funded, locally controlled, I'm like, great. If it's not broke, don't fix it. But if we have a problem that we haven't been able to solve and it's getting worse, that's when I say, okay, is this problem because this area of the country doesn't have the capacity to solve it, and we need to marshal larger forces and get creative and think outside the box? Literally get outside of the box of San Francisco and, like, look, we've got all this cheap land in America. We could build a ton of housing. We can provide people with food, water, shelter. I mean, everything that they reasonably need to live comfortably, and we could do it at a tenth of the cost that it would cost to do in San Francisco.
I think so it sounds to me like what you're getting at is, first bringing back it's bringing back a tradition and adding something new. The tradition is what used to be common, which is like in most places, it was sort of understood there's always going to be an underclass. Like, even if it's like really small, like you can't get rid of all of that. And most places, they just said, they just accepted it was going to be there and just had often very harsh rules about it, like seeping up into the broader culture. You said that can't happen. It is out of sight. We won't even talk about it in polite society, right? That's like, and as long as it stayed exceedingly marginal and very out of sight, maybe it was okay. But in our society, we are, given our openness and all kinds of other things, we are seeing problems, underclass problems, like bubbling up. And the thing you're adding is to say, it sounds like you're saying we're going to remove these people, to take them somewhere else physically and do something with them, like hope that is humane, like, maybe you make something out of them essentially, but totally abandoning this idea that it's like the homeless man in San Francisco is first and foremost a San Franciscan, or what, do they call themselves San Franciscans? Sorry. What do they call?
Listen, I just hate.
But you get the idea.
Yeah.
You get the idea.
Yeah.
It's like the homeless guy in Chicago, and maybe he is a Chicagoan for life, but like if it comes to, getting you off the streets, if you're going to go to Nebraska and be not homeless, that's better than Chicago and homeless.
It's so, I just never understood. I wasn't born in America, so I just never have understood.
Oh, where were you born?
I was born in Canada.
Okay.
And so from a young age, I knew I'm never going to be president, which I always thought was dumb and stupid and silly. I'm like, if I was in charge, I don't care where you're from. If you're the best president, you should be president. Anyone should be able to become president. Now, I understand people have like a need for patriotism, and we want to have like some level of intergenerational traditions and things like that. So I'm not saying like, oh, let's open the borders and whatever. Like, I think people draw conclusions from. I think context is important. So that's just my background. I never liked sports because I was like, wait, why am I rooting for this team? Well, this is the team of where we live, son. Oh, okay, well, all these people are not from this area. So why? Okay, what I should actually do is I should Google search my state and every single athlete and find out which team has the most athletes from my state and support that team, even if it's not like. Even like the team I'm supposed to support has people from all around the world, and we aren't even.
But you're talking about, this is more American sports, right? I mean, you're like, wouldn't you? I would imagine then you'd be more a fan of soccer, or what the entire rest of the world arrogantly calls football. But no, like right? Isn't it true? I'm not an expert, but like in England or Europe, like often the teams are comprised of, it's more local, bottom up, or am I totally off on that?
No, you're correct to an extent. I mean, people
like more than the NBA, or like professional football where there's like zero local relation, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, Tom Brady, great football player. He went to the Buccaneers, and it's just things like that I'm like, people worship you, and you're just like, because you're going to get paid some more money or something, you're going to, so those are things that make me think like, localism in America oftentimes is extremely dumb. Now, if somebody has an example in their own community where they're like, no, I live in Appalachia, and around here we take care of our own and we solve local problems with local solutions. It's like, again, great. If it's, I'm not here to like ban sports or like shame people for I don't know, you're rooting for the Buccaneers because Tom Brady. I don't know. Whatever people want to do, I'm fine with it. I'm just saying on an intuitive level, it's never appealed to me, the idea that we're going to like localism is always a solution. Localism is always good. I don't take that as a default. And if there's a potential for federalism, I guess I'm a federalist, there's a national solution to a problem that is concentrated. If we want to, and that's the basic idea of government in general, is that we have concentrated problems around the country, but we have a government which distributes the cost of those problems. I mean, that's the idea of insurance. That's the idea of having friends and family. If someone gets sick, you take care of them. I mean, this is just basic, we live in a society stuff. And so the idea that somehow we have to leave San Francisco alone to figure it out, its own problems, the idea, again, that's like a moral principle, or that makes you superior somehow. I don't buy that.
I don't know. I think I see what you're saying. And I think the devil's in the details. I think one thought is maybe the some of the localism is driven as a kind of understandable response to increasing feelings of atomization and dislocation. The idea of it's like we're in an increasingly cosmopolitan world, which may be great, but not everyone is a cosmopolitan person or a cosmopolitan temperament, right? So that may not be great for some people. So there may be a push for localism that then maybe misapplies or tries to, solve problems it shouldn't be tackling, right? Like that localism isn't the answer to everything. But I wondered, I don't know. I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I agree. If the national government could do something better, why not do it? But on the other hand, isn't there an epistemological objection that like going in from a like the feds parachuting in from a distance to tell people how to run their lives, like may not always have the best track record. I don't know. I'm not disagreeing. I think it's complicated.
No, I think it definitely depends on the context. Like, I really have no desire. I mean, like, look, there were people in West Virginia who have been here for almost 300 years, and, people around the country make fun of them and they call them backwards, and they're the butt of many jokes. But it's like, I don't feel the need to parachute the federal government and say, like, you're doing everything wrong and you guys all need to change. Right. I'm happy here's the thing, where there is an authentic local culture that is well established. I don't have some fetish for like, no one is ever allowed to have local culture anywhere. You must all be the same. Like, that's not really my approach to this. Instead, what I'm saying is when there's a clear problem and they're not dealing with it well, and I think you're correct, and I think it's sad, and I would call it a form of localism pornography, because we all want to have sex, right? This is a natural human impulse. And so if for some reason you're inhibited, maybe you think it's morally wrong, or you're not having success socially, or you don't have enough time, or whatever it is. Okay, so you know what? I'm just going to use pornography because I'm not able to obtain what I really want. And, that's how I view this emphasis on localism, where localism represents in some way a real good, like, people want to have a home, people want rootedness, people want a sense of patriotism, they want to belong to somewhere, they want a tribe. All of that is natural. But then saying like, well, we're San Franciscans and we do things the San Franciscan way. It's like, I don't know, dude. If you fly from Chicago to San Francisco to Boston to Miami, like, you're just going to get avocado toast no matter what Starbucks, you walk into. So on some level, let's just recognize that we have a national urban culture. And it was true before airplanes existed. There was a Chicago accent. There was a New York accent. There was a Southern accent. Like, we've had regional accents in America that are continuously being displaced. And in response to that displacement, which there is a legitimate conversation to be had about, are we losing our culture? Are we losing what it means to be an American? That's a legitimate conversation. But just saying, just having this empty local, it's a slogan. I mean, every time, you fly into an airport, they're like, welcome to the city of XYZ, where we do things the ABC way. And it's like, no, you don't. This is all cookie cutter mass culture. Like, there's nothing. The mayor of New York, I think, is one of the most guilty. He's like, here in New York, a New Yorker wears a mask because that's what New Yorkers do. It's like, no, that's what the federal government told you to do. So you're like, that's not authentic New York. Authentic New York culture is pushing you out of the way. I'm walking here, like, get out of the way. So,
Since when is authentic New York culture of like, we are compliant because like we care mostly in New York, we care about most? Cleanliness. What? Like, who has ever? That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So
I'm just, as someone who, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's just, I just have a pet peeve. I can't stand that kind of superficial political sloganeering where, we all have to stand together as citizens of this American city to really outcompete the other American cities in our, desire to, conform to some bureaucratic regulation or something. I'm like, I understand why politicians use that rhetoric, because they've done some, A/B testing or whatever, and they figured out that, oh, this is an unpopular measure. So if I couch it in terms of localism, people will have a less antagonistic, angry response because people have a lizard brain, and when you do things that make people upset, but you sprinkle in some like localism, then they're like, it's really dumb. It's really sad, but that's
It's
kind
just
of
like
how
fair.
people work.
To me, it rings like it's like fair. Local. Local is just one thing after the comma after fair trade, organic, and like whatever, like cruelty free. All of these things, by the way, which might be like in principle good or like the idea is good, but like has been turned into just total commercial bullshit as a way to like sell an aesthetic or an idea or a moral idea that you're doing something ethical or whatever is behind it. Uh, yeah, it's kind of slogany in an off-putting way, I think.
I'm totally in favor of moralizing over organic, cage free, and all of that. So if I'm a hypocrite on this issue, I'm content with that. I can accept that. So yeah, I mean, I guess I like, but I don't need it. Like, I don't need the chicken to be raised. Like, I need the chicken to be cage free because I can't stand factory farming, but I don't need it to be locally cage free. I'm okay with killing the chicken, putting it on a truck and putting it in a freezer, and it's from a different state or something. Like, I don't feel magically, oh, this is an Arkansas chicken and I live in Arkansas, so it tastes better than those Georgia chickens. It's like, well, if it really did taste different, you understand that you could just transport the chickens from one state to another and breed the chickens to be tasty. Like, this is kind of chicken heredity and animal husbandry and whatever. So yeah, I'm not a firm believer in the magic dirt of San Francisco is unique and inviolable, and we shall not violate the sovereignty of San Francisco. It's like, I mean, we kind of went through this with civil rights where there was this question of like, okay, it's illegal to discriminate, in federal cases, and so if a bus travels from a state with Jim Crow to a state without it, where do you stop at the state line and like end the segregation? What do you do with that? So that was a question that we already had to deal with of, to what extent do states have the right to govern their own commerce? And this is a constitutional question. We have this constitutional system and states' rights and whatnot. But what I'm saying is, what I would prefer is, instead of the federal government coming in and saying like, we're commandeering San Francisco and we're taking it over, and instead what I would like is for people within San Francisco to say like, San Francisco is a very expensive city to live in. We have a lot of resources, but housing people here is not a good use of our resources because of price differentials. And so we need to partner with other states. We need to partner with Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, all these states that have really cheap land and cheap housing, and actually would really benefit if, instead of spending $90,000 to try to do something in San Francisco, you could do it for $30,000 or even a greater differential just by putting people on a bus. And in fact, the people in Nebraska, Kansas, whatever, they would really appreciate it if that would be a win-win. It's like, okay, you're building housing, you're giving construction workers jobs. I mean, everyone wins. I mean, this is the same argument why free trade is good. And so whenever you have these like little state boundaries and you enforce like, no, this city's got to do this way, it's like that's the same thing as saying, well, we can't get this thing from this other country because it has to be made in America. I think that's a different. I'm actually more sympathetic to tariffs on a national level, but within the country, no, we want to be united. Like we shouldn't have any kind of barriers or borders within the country.
It's surprising to me. I think I can feel multiple ways about this. I think how like not localism in the bad way in quotes, but like how local versus federal kind of a view I take of things, and I can appreciate multiple different approaches. But I'm just thinking about how astonishing to me it is, and I'm mostly just out of ignorance, but that, the US, we are a really big country. It's easy to forget how much space we have. We have tons of space. And like, even though I think I might get some details wrong here, but like, where I think we're roughly the size of China, like China and the US are like approximately geographically equal in terms of land area. But I think we have way more space people can live in, right? I mean, we like huge areas of China are taken up by like the Himalayas and various other things. So we have much more actual physical space. I think I could be wrong, but like so little of that space is populated. And I find it hard to believe that we couldn't adjust our farming a little bit, reduce the land we're farming on by like 15%, 10%, just like, and 100 million people could fit in new cities in the middle of our country. I don't mean to make this sound easy. I'm not trying to say like, why can't the world be just the way I want it? But like, on the other hand, yeah, I don't get it. You would think that we'd be trying to do a little bit more of that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, federal urban planning. I mean, we the current system that we have is rich people live in big coastal cities for the most part. That's where all the tax money is. That's where all the programs get funded. And so, if you are a poor person and you want access to resources, you're kind of incentivized to go into these big wealthy population centers. And then we ask, why is there so much poverty here? Well, the answer is because the money stays locally. If we had a national federal system where we said there's a big pool, everyone's going to contribute to the pool, and then in terms of where we're actually going to build housing, it's like transportation is not that expensive. You can transport people, like and also I would say climate plays into this, right? We have these big coastal cities, and then every so often we get this storm or we get flooding. I mean, the New York subway is getting flooded. I keep seeing these videos on Twitter, and I think like, look, the idea of New York City is great. It's a big, beautiful city. It's got a huge subway system. There's millions of people living there. Awesome, great. Does it have to be located in a flood zone, or could we start? And it's not going to happen tomorrow, but why don't we start building sustainable cities that aren't going to be hit by flooding and hurricanes and sea level rise? Because if we think that's coming, and I think there's a reasonable projection, we are going to see sea level rise. Why don't we begin today building infrastructure that is resilient to that, rather than waiting for, now it's too late because now, everyone's
that's
die.
Easy. That's easy. No, that's an answer to that question is obvious. We are invincible. That's why. I'm being sarcastic there in case no one can see, the people who are listening and not watching. But I think like that psychology is there. Like there's this idea that we are kind of invincible. And I think what you were saying just generated this for me, that some paradoxically, where there might be a disadvantage that given how rarely our country is, say, like bombed or to pieces or fundamentally changed government, like unlike Europe in the 40s or various other countries at other times, post-colonial periods, we didn't have that chance to kind of rebuild everything. So it's how long is it going to continue on before really needing a major renovation? And so I think the reason we're not doing those preparations, it's the same reason that people, won't stop smoking. Well, sometimes they won't stop smoking until after they get lung cancer, but like, you're not going to stop doing the bad stuff until reality hits you in the face hard enough that you just really can't ignore it. That's how incentives work. And so I know this is going a little bit in another direction, but I'm trying to think psychologically about this. I think that's why you see a fair amount of the burn it all down sentiment. It's not just cynicism. Some of it's cynicism, but some of it is a sense of like, our not the country, but itself, like our kind of current way of doing things, the last like 100-ish years, in our country, it's like a zombie creeping along. It's too old. It's being kept alive, and it needs to, turn into something. It needs to die so something new can be born. I'm not saying I support that view, but I think I can understand it. It's the same psychology behind, who is it in the Batman, Bane, or like the characters who are like, it's the first one, Batman Begins, Ra's al Ghul, who says he needs to burn down Gotham City for its own good, right? So something new can come in. That sentiment, I think, I don't make predictions, but I'll predict that sentiment grows like over the next decades, that people will have this feeling of like, there needs to be a big change because things are too sclerotic and we can't do anything. Sorry, I was bringing in a lot of different thoughts there, but like,
right.
that's why we can't build stuff on the coast.
Yeah. We got to get. In my opinion, we have to totally evacuate the coast. But I think the way you do that, I'm in favor of a federal property tax. I think that we need to be spending less in federal income tax and capital gains and stuff. And we need to say, hey, if you live in an area where FEMA is going to have to come in every 10 years and bail you guys out on a national level, because that's what happens. You live in
You should pay
Florida.
for it.
Yeah, you got to pay for it. If you want to live on the coast, you pay for it. I don't have a problem. Also, in the American Southwest, like we have a problem with our water resources where if you drain the reserve enough, it doesn't come back. Like once it reaches rock bottom, it doesn't just fill up again because of how evaporation works with respect to volume and surface area. So how do we account for that? There has to be either like a water tax or there has to be like a property tax to say we can't sustain this level of development. Now, if you want to do some off-grid solution with a bunch of rain barrels and get your own water supply, drill a well, whatever, like I'm happy for people to be survivalists and figure it out. And like, government leaves me alone. I don't take any tax. I'm not on welfare. But it's like, if you're on welfare in New York City and the city is stressed and the subway is underwater, like we just need to start getting people out of there. We need to rebuild. So, I totally agree with what you're saying in that there is a certain logic to like, what, tabula rasa, blank slate. Let's start fresh, like blank canvas. Let's rebuild America. Let's not try to fix these cities that have very deep problems, sometimes environmental problems outside our control. Like even if we stop carbon emissions, like there's still going to be other countries doing it, whatever. So let's rebuild. Let's rebuild in Kansas. Let's rebuild in Nebraska. Let's rebuild in these places that it's very cheap. So yeah, that would be. I also want to be respectful of your time here. I've been enjoying the conversation, so I haven't. I don't have a time limit tonight, but we're approaching 2 hours, so I want to
I was
give you the warning
normally.
here. So kind of.
No, that's fine.
Sorry, we had a little bit of.
Oh, sorry. No, your signal. Yeah, the latency. I was just going to say that normally I would be down to just keep going as like forever. But it has been somewhat of a long day, and so I might start to fade. So, but I don't know. I think a few more minutes for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. I think my strategy generally is to say to people like, let's do a quick 1 hour conversation, and if we like where it's going, let's do a follow-up separate conversation. But in this, I felt like the topics were so in depth, and that I said like, let's just continue on this train, so that I don't lose this thread of thought. But yeah, in kind of wrapping things up, in closing, I want to throw out what my basic approach to, because we started this off about criminal justice. So to wrap it up and bring it back, it's that there's a concept in the Bible of cities of refuge. If you commit a crime, you go to the city of refuge. And when you're reading the Bible or the Torah for the first time, you think, what the heck? Like you committed a crime and then there's like you just go somewhere and it's okay. But that system, I think, it actually can work. I think it requires like some creative thinking, and it depends on the nature of the crime. But I think there's two forms of exile: external exile and internal exile. And like you said, we got a lot of space, and I think that we could designate areas of our country, put up a big, beautiful border wall, but take some area of the country that's essentially uninhabited, it's farmland, and take that and say, what, you've committed this level of crime, and so you're going to live in this new city. And obviously, if you're trying to break out of the city or whatever, we need to escalate the situation. But if you committed a crime, I think the criticism of this isn't that just an open air prison? And, even worse, if it's an inhumane situation, you say, isn't this a concentration camp? But the point of it is not to be concentrated. The point of it is not to be a prison. It's to say you can have a job in this community. You can go outside. You have freedom of movement. You have choices that you can make. If you have friends or family members who want to live with you, they can choose to enter into this place. It's just you're not allowed to leave. And so, just to me, it's about allowing people more freedom, more dignity, and more economic productivity. Because as you said earlier with white collar crime, when we put someone in jail who has productive skills, we are stealing not just from them, we're stealing from all of society, because now we just lost a worker. So there's that internal idea. And then to escalate that further, there's external exile, which means that we don't trust you to be anywhere in this country. We don't want you in a special community. We don't want you in a city of refuge. We need you to be completely out of the country. Now, then there's two ways of doing it. There's voluntary exile, which means you choose the country, you figure it out, you get a visa and you leave, and you're not allowed back in. If we find you back in the country, then we escalate to some other level where maybe you do have to be imprisoned, or maybe you do need to be flogged, or a combination. But for external exile, we hope that it's a voluntary situation. We hope that there is a country that looks at you and says, you committed a crime, but for a certain amount of money, we're willing to accept you into our country. And you can ask, well, where's that money going to come from? Well, as it turns out, prisons are very expensive. And so instead of spending that money on prisons, you can essentially spend money on compensating third-party countries to take in these exiles. Now, what exactly happens to them in those third-party countries depends on their crime. It depends on the agreement between America, the third-party country, and the individual who committed the crime, right? So it's not, there's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Sometimes it's a Guantanamo Bay situation. Sometimes we have a crazy criminal who needs to get out of the country. There's a foreign country, and it puts them in a prison, and maybe those conditions aren't exactly what we would like or something. But I think having that tiered system, it frees up resources so that we can help people, because the amount of money that we're spending on criminal justice and the results that we're getting are very poor. And the more we waste money, the more that people die. I mean, people die because of bad policing. People die because we're not putting people in jail or removing them from society. People die because we have recidivism. So this isn't just as much as I say I want to have empathy for people to the extent that they can handle greater freedom. I want to give them greater freedom. I want to give them greater dignity. But also, there's cases where, as you say, there's like a percentage of the population who are chronically antisocial. There's nothing that can be done to reform them, that we don't have those tools. Hopefully someday we do come up with the tools, some kind of, crazy surgery or pill or something. We don't have that right now. So we have to deal with reality as it is. And housing these people in American prisons, don't think it's moral. I don't think it's cost effective. And I think we have a lot of other options involving land within our country as well as land outside of our country. And, as it turns out, plane tickets are very cheap. The average cost of imprisonment is like $40,000.
So, okay, I'll give a few responses, and if any of these are even vaguely intelligent, you can incorporate them into your argument, or hopefully it helps refine things. So, first off, in principle, I totally agree that expanding the range of judicial solutions we're willing to consider is essential. I think for us, we got to get out of our old ways of thinking. I agree, empathy for convicts, prisoners is important. Although I think in this situation, it's important to say, I would say we shouldn't have more empathy for them than we do victims and ordinary people. I think when I talk about having empathy for convicts and prisoners, it is for me a decidedly second order or second tier. I don't want to let that empathy for them override the necessity of justice being served for people who are harmed. And so I think that's just, I don't know exactly where, specifically where that leads, but just keeping that consideration in mind. In terms of exile, so I don't know about this, but my thought is, if we're going to exile people, if we're talking about the baddest of the bad, the voluntary thing is interesting. I have to think about that, whether that works in practice. But for the baddest of the bad, exile seems to me to say, we're going to send you someplace where people can do something to you we don't want to do to you here, which sounds similar to what we talked about at the very beginning of people saying, oh, I hope you get raped in prison, right? That like, I hope you go somewhere where I can turn a blind eye and something terrible happens. And I would, I think, be more in favor of, if we're going to do something terrible to someone, we should be the ones doing it. The way we want to and the way we feel is right. And I guess intuitively, when you talk about Guantanamo, I have to admit, I am nervous about people being sent to places run by the US government overseas. Just who knows what could possibly happen there. And, I'm talking about things even beyond ordinary abuse, so truly horrific things. I'm not trying to sound conspiratorial. It's just that, all governments do terrible things. And we should be alert to that. Also, can I just say, this is going to sound like it's out of nowhere. Do you like George Carlin? Do you watch George Carlin at all?
I went through a very heavy George Carlin phase, so yeah.
Good man. Okay, good. Do you remember his bit where he talked about his plan for criminals? I'm probably getting the details wrong, but it was basically like, it was something like you put a giant wall around some, Kansas or Nebraska or something like that, and just dump them all in there, and then you put it on pay-per-view, which would pay off the national debt real fast because people would watch that. I'm not actively advocating for that, but just in the spirit of very creative solutions, I guess a form of domestic exile into a walled-off state.
I also think people should be allowed to duel. I think
interesting.
if you want to, if two people hate each other and they're like, we want to fight each other and maybe kill each other, it's like, if you guys want to sign that and get the lawyers together, I don't know. I'm not. The problem is that when you say, okay, dueling's not allowed, dueling is barbaric, dueling is evil, it's like, okay, be that as it may, people are still going to do it anyway. They're just going to do it in a completely illegal way, completely unregulated, and it's going to result in a lot more. In fact, you get drive-by shootings or whatever, and you get innocent people being hurt as a consequence. So yeah, having making it easier and reducing liability for, like, let's say you have a boxing match or something. Just be like, listen, you're both adults. You're going to go in and punch each other. Here are the rules, whatever. Right now, it for some reason, it costs a lot of money to get that done. And yeah, I'm in favor of two people. They're like, we're going to take our 12 paces and then shoot each other. So I think that would be an example of what you're talking about, where there's stuff that goes on, but we want to turn a blind eye to it. We don't want to legalize dueling because dueling is ugly. Well, here's the sad fact. People duel in America all the time, whether you want to call it dueling or not. And a lot of people are hurt as a consequence. And by putting that into a legal structure, obviously I don't want people shooting each other. The point is to stop people from shooting each other in the streets. That's what I want to stop. And so if two people have a dispute and they want to kill each other, like, yeah, sign these papers, go into this cage, and do whatever you want to each other. Sure. And in terms of the third-party countries, Guantanamo Bay, doing cruel things, absolutely. I understand that. I'm sympathetic to that. What I would say is that we have an overloaded prison system. We have an expensive prison system. I think one way to approach it would be to say, we are going to basically buy prisons overseas where it's a lot cheaper to run a prison, but we're going to have some kind of oversight committee. We're going to have people there who are ensuring the prisoners are not going to be abused. They're not going to be hit. They're not going to be beaten. They're not going to be denied food or water. They're going to be treated with the dignity that we determine necessary. But it's going to be cheaper because the land that the prison is built on is cheaper, because the construction company is cheaper, because the prison guards are going to be cheaper. But we can maintain civilized behavior. We can do it at a cheaper rate. The next part I would say is that even third world countries, we can actually look at what the Democratic Republic of the Congo or South Africa or many other countries which we would say are semi-functional countries, maybe semi-functional. These countries have a criminal justice system, and if you're a murderer, for example, there's a prison term. It could be 20 years, could be 30 years, 10 years, whatever. But given that fact, these people are eventually going to be released. If we had them in America, they would be released. If a South African commits a murder in South Africa, they will eventually release that murderer, just as we do in America. And so the point of it is, the reason why I'm advocating, again, not for all criminals, but for the worst of the worst, saying we're going to put you in a Congolese prison, we're going to put you in a South African prison, is because eventually those people have to be released. And when they're released, I do not want them released in America. I want them released pretty much anywhere else. And again, that's not a blanket statement. Hashtag not all murderers.
Yeah.
You know, not all murderers are the same.
No, I hear you.
There's good people. There's good
If we really want to
murderers and
go,
there's bad murderers. So
if we really want to go out there, if we really want to take this idea to its conclusion, logical conclusion, we do some sort of with Slab City, where the federal government says to, especially like really big organized gangs that have some structure, right? It says, you know, MS-13, Bloods, Crips, whoever, whatever. Okay, look, guys, just you guys can shoot each other as much as you want. We're legalizing dueling for the gangs. Just make some sort of system. Do it in, you know, this federal land we've cornered off for you. We'll make sure no innocent people go there. Just do your thing there and stay out of everyone else's way. I'm not seriously proposing that, but that's sort of where this leads, which is kind of an that's kind of an interesting thought in a strange way. I don't know. I don't think it would work, but
yeah. The problem for me is that I think the gangs should just not exist at all.
Of course. Oh, obviously. Yeah. I mean, yeah, if we're being serious about it, you just have to destroy them. If we're being really, you know, serious, but
if people,
no,
listen,
I think
we have police cameras now. So, I mean, if people want to watch a gang war, they should be watching police camera footage of, you know, and we could get into the cartels and what I think we should do about the cartels and open all this. But I just wanted to provide that because I realized we had this whole conversation and we shifted in homelessness, but I never actually really said what I mean when I talk about, you know, what does abolishing the prisons look like? Okay, it's a tiered system. We can abolish 99% of American prisons. It's going to save a lot of money. We redistribute those resources. We save lives. So yeah, I wanted to make sure we got that in before we ended. But I know we're winding down. I want to give you the last word, closing thoughts. Tell me what you're reading, who you're reading, what you recommend, and what you're working on for the future.
Oh wow. Well, it's been a pleasure. You know, talking about all this stuff with you. There's been a lot of fun. And I just, yeah, I like, you know, even if most of the stuff I say is, you know, not right or I don't understand the details, I think just exercising our creativity in terms of, you know, problem solving in these areas is important. And in terms, and I look forward to reading your article or what you're writing about this to see the fully fleshed out solution. If we could get a good exile system going, I could support that. I think. So what am I reading? I'm always, my habit is typically that I'm reading many things simultaneously, and dipping back into them, you know, here and there. So right now I've been reading a lot on the history of Chan and Zen Buddhism. That's something I've been interested in for a long time. And I kind of, like an addict, I kind of relapse and come back to it with some regularity. I can't kick the habit. And so I've been reading a lot about that and poetry, Zen poetry, and how that, how the two of those interacted over the centuries. And what am I writing? What am I working on? So one thing I'm working on is some stuff about that. And I'm trying to figure out a way to write about my own, you know, practice. I did meditation for a long time and was very into the Buddhism stuff and do I have something to say about that other people want to hear? Do I have anything insightful to say about the Zen tradition, which I've always loved and found interesting. So I'm going to try to get something on that out someday. And then last week I released part 2 of a a series I started on the psychiatric interview for non-psychiatrists. So for those who are kind of wondering what's going through a psychiatrist's mind when he's interviewing a patient, seeing a patient for the first time, how do they think? How does he organize his thoughts? This is going to try to clear that up and spell that out. So the first two have been released, and there'll be a number of other parts coming out every 1 to 2 weeks, hopefully.
Yeah, I've caught wind of those, and they've had a very good reception. I think it's a credit to you that you're able to kind of help people embody that mind or put themselves, allow them to see things through your eyes. And it's very creative. It's very, it's obviously it's based on a true story and stuff, but it's one of those situations sometimes like the truth is more exciting than like a fictional story of like a drama or superhero or something. It's like, wow, this is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I recommend people go check that out. I will link some of that in the show notes here. But yeah, I mean, this has been great. I usually don't go 2 hours. My policy is like I try to hit 1 hour, and if it's going really well, we do an extra 30 minutes. But I felt very excited about hearing your perspective and having the constructive criticism back and forth, and trying to refine ideas and really dial in, what's going on. And as you said, we might not get everything right, but the creative exercise is beneficial in itself. So I appreciate your
absolutely.
Yeah. I'm sorry. My internet was not powerful enough to carry our cameras all the way through, but I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and I hope we can do it again soon.
My pleasure. And yeah, no, I'm down for it. I love this. The conversations are intrinsically worth it. And so, yeah, anytime for sure. Thank you again.
Absolutely. All right. Take care, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Likewise. You too.
Yep. Bye now.
Alrighty.
Okay. That's done. 2 hours. Long one. You gotta like the post. You gotta, it's been a long day. But no, I'm happy with how that turned out. I'm pleasantly surprised because I have a baseline. I have a baseline expectation that's like the median expectation of how every interview is going to go, and I didn't think we'd make it past an hour just because I thought, oh, he's a busy guy, he's got a lot going on. But I was just incredibly grateful that he appreciated what I had to say. He's a smart guy. He's an educated guy. And I think, not to rag on psychiatrists, but I just assumed like, well, he's probably got his own ideas, and he might not be receptive, or he might be what is it called, suspicious or hesitant, or kind of what's this, like dismiss. I thought he might be dismissive, and I say some zany things, and he might be like, wow, that's probably not true. But he really gave me the idea. He really gave me the time of day. He really listened to what I had to say. I mean, that's a very valuable skill that not everybody has. So, it was very pleasurable for me to talk to somebody who was willing to listen to what I had to say and think critically about it, not just to accept what I'm saying in a sycophantic way, but also not to dismiss it, because that takes you got to really respect somebody to do that. So yeah, I thought that was it was very good, but it was also a long interview. So I don't normally do 2 hours. It's a lot of work. I'm standing up here. I'm not even sitting down. I'm standing up. I'm moving around. I'm a soldier. So yeah, please do like the post. Please restack the post. Please comment on the post. Share it on social media. The Twitter will shadow ban you for posting the Substack link, but you can get around that by posting like a screenshot and then the links in the comments. But anyway, guys, I appreciate it. I'm going to go to sleep because I'm tired, because I've had a long day, but I'm glad we were able to do that. Peace. Till next time. See ya.